Welcome to this fun little class. We are going to play with some paint and we are going to use a really cheap composition notebook. And I love it because they don't cost anything. And if you want to try out some new colors or new paint techniques, this is the perfect paper to use. It's super thin, and you would think that this isn't going to hold up to acrylic paint, but actually, since the acrylic paint dries as a type of plastic, it's actually beneficial for the paper because it strengthens the paper and you're able to go over your acrylic work with any sort of pen. So this is really a mixed media little journey we're going to take here. And what I wanted to do was start this off by just grabbing some paint. And I have some colors out here. I don't know how many of these I'm going to use. Um, these are mostly folk art paints. Most of them are matte. I find that the matte paints take pen and stuff a lot better than if you're using any sort of glossy paint. So I would suggest just grabbing some colors that you love and start playing. And that is literally what we're going to do. I have some flat brushes here. I'll use one to lay all of my colors on with, and then I'll use these two to go back in and start carving out some shapes. And we are going to keep this super basic, and I thought we could play a little bit with pattern. And all of my classes this year for Make Create Express are about birds, and you're going to get your fill of birds. So I thought we would do something a little bit more simple, kind of give you a little bit of a taste of, like my teaching style and how I approach my work. So I do a lot of stuff. I love mixed media, but I also paint watercolor, and I have done this technique with watercolor and ink. So, if that's something that you want to try, just make sure if you're using watercolor that you've got paper that will support it. Same thing with the ink. I would not suggest the composition notebook for that, but it will work great with acrylics. So I'm just going to start by, I'm going to grab some random colors here. I'm going to start with purple because purple is my favorite color, and I am just going to add some little drops on there. I've got green. This is my favorite color combination, purple and green. Let's get that out of there. And you want to make sure that you start brushing this on before it dries. I do have a jug of water off to the side too. I don't want this to be too watery. And I am going to add a third color. And you can see this purple and green is going to make a really nice muddy color, really nice neutral color. So I just want to be careful when I'm spreading these out. I don't want to mix them too much. I think I'm going to add a little bit of turquoise and probably some yellow in here too. I think we need a little bit of a pop with this turquoise. And if you have some colors that, you want to try out, or you're afraid of color, maybe you're not sure. Well, this is a great way to be super non-committal. We're not painting anything precious. You're not using a canvas. All you're doing is playing with some paint and spreading some paint on the paper, and that's it. And I think we need another color in here. Add some of this. This is like a gold, like a yellow ochre. It's just a little bit of a muted yellow, if I can get it out. And I'm going to paint all the way out to the edges here. And that's why I have this printer paper, just to protect the rest of the journal. And that yellow is turning the same green that I put on there initially once it hits the turquoise. And as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking it might need something else. Well, let's see what happens if we add this. This is kind of a corally color. I don't know how well this is going to go in here, but we'll find out. And that's just what this is all about. And if you keep your color in little areas like this, then you can prevent the muddy colors and the mixing. And if there's something that you don't like, then you can go right back over it with a different color. I would wait until it dries if you're worried if it's going to make mud. And I don't, I'm not too crazy about that coral color in there. I feel like it's like a little bit of an outlier. So I will probably just go back in here and I'm just going to add a little bit more purple, and I might leave some of those pink colors kind of popping through. But I definitely want to make sure that I've got all of these edges covered, and I don't want to see any white. And I'm going to do a little bit more of the yellow. And I think that's enough. I can just kind of take that over all of certain, areas. And you can see I'm making a little bit of mud here because I've gotten into the purple with this yellow. And yellow and purple sit opposite each other on the color wheel. So they are complementary colors. And anytime you mix complementary colors together with it, whether it's red and green or orange and blue or purple and yellow, you're going to get a neutral. So, or what some people like to call mud. And it can be very useful depending on what you're doing and what you're painting. And do we need a little bit more green? I'm thinking maybe just a little in some of these areas where it got just a little muddy. I want to brighten those back up, I think. And you can see I'm being kind of careful, trying not to over blend. And I think that looks pretty good. So I am going to blow dry this so that we can start on the next part. So this is pretty dry now. There are still a few areas that are a little bit wet, but they'll dry quick enough. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start making some circles. I'm going to hand draw them. I'm not going to get out any sort of template or stencil. I'm just going to hand draw these in. And you can vary the size. You don't have to use circles. You can use triangles or squares, whatever you want. But you can make some of these go off the page. Put them up in the corner. Like I said, you can definitely vary the area and the size and the shape. And when you're drawing your circles, these are the areas that are going to be poking through because we're going to paint the rest of this background a solid color. And something that I've had in my head for a while is to do a journal spread like this, and I want to section off, I want to paint different colored backgrounds so that I have like a sampler kind of what different backgrounds are going to look like. So maybe I paint part of this white and I'll paint another section of it black. Maybe I'll try some gold. I have some gold acrylic paint and maybe a navy blue or a purple. So I want to see what the different colored backgrounds look like and what I like the best. So I think to keep this interesting, what I'm going to do is grab my ruler and I'm just going to make some lines through here to kind of designate where I want to keep these different backgrounds. So I'll do one background right here, and I'm going to try 4 different paints. So I'll do one right through the middle here. I'm going to cut right through my circles. I think that'll look really interesting. And I'm probably going to keep the smallest one, the smallest section for my gold, because I don't think this gold is very opaque. We'll find out. I might have to go over it a couple of times. So I want to keep the gold part the smallest part. So we'll start up here, and I think I am going to start off with maybe the navy blue. And I'm going to section off a couple of more circles here. And maybe one right here. Okay. So I will get out my navy blue paint, and I've got a little palette here. And I'm going to be using a relatively small brush just because this is a small section. And this is a really, really dark navy blue. And if you've got a flat brush too that has a little bit of an angle to it, I actually think I've got one here, like that. That's always really good for getting in little spaces. And typically the brushes that I buy are super inexpensive, especially when I'm doing something like this. And I think this paint that I'm using right now, it's probably going to require another coat because it's pretty transparent, it's pretty thin. So I'll get this laid in. I'm not trying to go for perfect circles. This is just a journal exercise. So there's nothing about this that's perfect. And if you're into patterns like I am, and you love creating them, this is also another great place to experiment with pattern ideas, not just with color palettes, but the actual pattern itself. So you could do something like this with florals, um, other shapes. You could do stripes. It's really this is just like a jumping off point. And I might just put another circle in there without following a sketch. So as you can see, that is really not very opaque. This is kind of thin paint. So I'm going to have to go back in and add a second layer, but I can go ahead and switch over to a different color. And to keep this fun, I think I'm going to do this one white. So I'm going to let this white dry because it's going to need another coat too. And give my brush a good rinse. Now I feel like since I have that navy blue over there, do I really want to do a black? Because to me that seems kind of redundant. So I think maybe what I'm going to do is pick one of the colors that's in this palette, and that's what I'm going to use to block out the background on this. And this turquoise is calling to me, so turquoise it is. And any areas that I see that I feel like could use another circle, I can improvise and add a circle like that. And if you go over your little section line, that's not a big deal because you can always fix it when the paint's dry. So since this is a bigger section, I am going to speed this one up. And when I'm finished with this one, we'll move on to the gold. So once I'm finished painting this, I am going to go back and start all over, and I'm going to get a second coat applied to everything, and then we'll move on to the next step. I think doing an exercise like this too, with all of these colors and trying the backgrounds, it gives you a really good sense of just how contrast works, and you'll see what you like better and obviously what draws your eye. But this is, as I was talking before, a great way to try out different color palettes. And if you go on Pinterest, you can type in color palettes, and they'll give you back a whole bunch of different like swatches, and find some swatches that you like and try to replicate those colors that you see. And you can always use this type of a journal spread as uh, your own palette sampler, really. So I have like really, a certain amount of colors in here that I can annotate in these bubbles if I wanted to, or write somewhere so that I can remember. And then you have the colors as the background, so you can kind of see how they all work together. And we're going to add some details at the end just to make it a little bit more fun. This is a journal after all. So So this is dry for the most part, and I did add a second coat, and I also went through and erased all of my white sketch lines, and this is what we have left. So in order to unify this whole page, what I like to do is make sure that there is some of each of these background colors in the other blocks. And we can do this really simply by grabbing our brush, and let's start with the blue. I think it's dry enough. And all I'm going to do is dip the end of my paintbrush into the gold, and I'm going to make little dots. I'm going to make random dots. And the cool thing about using the back end of a brush is that the first dot will be huge, typically, not in that case. So you have a big dot, and every time you push down on the paper, the dots get repeatedly smaller. So it's a good way to vary the marks on the page. And that got out of control. And maybe one there, there, and there. So now we have a little bit of gold up here in the blue, and I want to do the same thing for the rest of these blocks. So maybe I'm going to add some white on top of the turquoise because I think it'll show up the best. And we can figure out a different mark that we want to make. If we're going to use some other mark making ideas, then I'm going to grab a really tiny flat brush. Okay, I think for this, what I'm going to do is, since I have this little bitty flat brush, I'm just going to make some little groupings of squares like this. And I can go the other direction. And I can even overlap some of the circles if I want to. And I don't want to get too carried away with the background marks because I don't want this to be, I don't want it to get super busy because we're going to do some stuff inside the circles as well. And I always like to add stuff going off the page too. And the reason that we're doing this, it's going to help unify the entire journal spread so that it looks really intentional. And it doesn't take any time to do this. This is just more play. And maybe a mark there. I think that's good. Which means we've got to figure out what we want to do for these two. So we've got the white and we have the gold. And obviously anything that we use on the white is going to show up pretty good. And I think we're going to use the dark blue on the gold, and we'll use the gold on the white. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Like I said, I don't want to get too carried away with all of the background stuff because I want to detail some of these circles. And I am going to grab my white gel pen that I've got, and I have several. I have a monster collection of white pens, and the reason for that is I want my white pens to work on every surface that I have. So I have a ton of them. And let's see how this one. You always have to test these out a little bit. And if you're not getting the line that you want, then maybe you need to switch to something else. And I'm going to try this Posca pen. These usually work pretty well on everything. And this is a fine tipped. I think this is an extra fine tip. It is a 0.7 millimeter. And I think I'm going to start drawing some, just going to do some random lines through here. Again, no rhyme or reason. I'm going to go back over this line just because they are a little transparent. I don't think I had the pen primed very well. Now you don't have to do lines. You can do anything that you want to do. So you can do little circles. And this is the part that I was talking about. You can let the rest of this dry, and then when you have time, maybe in the evening when you're hanging out in front of the TV, then you can add in all of your little details. And you don't have to limit this to just a white pen either. So I am back in my studio, and it is actually the next day, and I have finished up this journal spread. Now, when I mentioned before that, once you have the acrylic on here, then you can just take your pens and start adding in a bunch of different embellishments. And that's exactly what I did when I was sitting on the couch last night. And this is a process that is so much fun. And don't even worry about what the end result looks like, really. This is just about having fun and getting into flow and experimenting with your supplies. And I think it actually turned out really cool. And I have some other ideas now about creating another journal spread, except I want to use a little bit more of a neutral palette and maybe use some organic shapes like leaves. So it's a really great process. I hope you have a lot of fun with this. I'm going to go in a little bit close so that you can see everything that I did. I did use some black pen, and because the colors are a little bit darker, it's a little bit difficult to see the black work. But I still went ahead and put it in there, and I also added in some of these little black lines right through here on the background. I added in some black dots. And the idea was just to keep everything unified. So I added in some white dots up here as well. So every section has a little bit of every other section. And this was a lot of fun. I hope you give this a try. I hope you've already got some colors in mind that you want to try. And I cannot wait to see what you do. Have fun.